At my sister's housewarming party, she stood up with champagne in hand and announced to everyone that she was finally ready to expand her real estate empire, and that the competition in our small town was officially over. The room erupted in applause. My parents beamed with pride. My extended family nodded approvingly. And me? I smiled and clapped along, even though she had systematically destroyed my entire client database just 2 weeks earlier. What I did next shocked everyone in that room, including myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The thing about being the younger sibling in a family obsessed with success is that you spend most of your childhood believing that love is something you earn through achievement. My sister Emma was 26 when I was born, which meant that by the time I could form complete sentences, she was already the golden standard against which everything I did would be measured. She had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, landed a prestigious job at a Chicago marketing firm, and was dating a guy who drove a BMW and wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I learned early that Emma didn't just succeed at things, she dominated them. When she decided to run a marathon, she didn't just finish, she placed third in her age group. When she took up pottery as a hobby, her ceramics ended up being featured in a local gallery show. When she learned to cook, she hosted dinner parties that had our relatives talking for months about her perfectly seasoned lamb and her homemade bread that apparently rivaled anything you could get at the fancy bakeries downtown. My parents, David and Carol Martinez, treated Emma's accomplishments like family heirlooms, polishing them regularly and displaying them prominently for anyone who would listen. Our living room was essentially a shrine to Emma's excellence. Her college diploma hung in a custom frame above the mantelpiece. Her marathon medal sat on the bookshelf next to a photo of her crossing the finish line, arms raised in victory. Even her high school valedictorian speech was laminated and tucked into a photo album that my mother would produce at family gatherings like it was the Dead Sea Scrolls. Growing up in Emma's shadow wasn't just about being compared to her constantly, though that certainly happened. It was about learning that in our family, there was only room for one star, and that position had been permanently filled before I'd even learned to walk. My achievements weren't celebrated so much as they were acknowledged with polite nods and immediate redirections back to whatever Emma was doing. When I made honor roll, my mother would say, "That's nice, dear," and then launch into a story about how Emma had been valedictorian. When I scored the winning goal in my soccer championship, my father would pat my shoulder and mention how Emma had lettered in 3 sports. The message was clear and consistent. Emma was the daughter who made things happen. I was the daughter who tried really hard. I spent my teenage years convinced that if I could just find the right thing, the thing Emma hadn't already conquered, maybe I could carve out my own space in our family's narrative. I tried drama club, but Emma had starred in the school musical her senior year. I attempted debate team, but Emma had won state championships in forensics. I even briefly considered taking up the violin, until I discovered that Emma had played first chair in the symphony orchestra. It wasn't until I was 17 that I stumbled into something that felt genuinely mine. Mrs. Patterson, my senior year English teacher, had assigned us a project on local history, and I'd chosen to research the old Victorian houses in our downtown area. What started as homework turned into genuine fascination. I spent weeks in the library, poring over property records and architectural surveys. I interviewed longtime residents about the families who had lived in these homes, the businesses that had occupied their first floors, the stories hidden behind their ornate facades. When I presented my project, something clicked. I wasn't just regurgitating information I'd memorized, I was telling stories that mattered. Stories about how our town had evolved, about the families who had built their dreams into these beautiful old structures, about the way architecture could hold memory and meaning across generations. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had found something that was authentically mine. That summer, I got a job working for Henderson Realty, one of the 2 real estate offices in our town of Millbrook. I started as a filing clerk, but Margaret Henderson, the owner, quickly realized that my passion for local history made me uniquely suited to help clients understand not just the practical aspects of properties but their stories. I could tell potential buyers about the craftsman who had built the custom cabinets in a 1920s bungalow, or explain the significance of the carriage house behind a Victorian mansion. or share the story of how a particular neighborhood had been developed by a group of teachers who wanted to create an affordable community for other educators. Margaret became more than just a boss, she became a mentor. She was in her 60s, had never married, and had built her real estate business from nothing into one of the most respected agencies in the county. She understood what it meant to work twice as hard for half the recognition, and she saw potential in me that I was still learning to see in myself. Under her guidance, I discovered that I had a natural talent for connecting with people, for understanding what they really wanted in a home beyond just the number of bedrooms and bathrooms. By the time I graduated high school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life. I enrolled in the local community college's business program, focusing on marketing and communications, while continuing to work part-time at Henderson Realty. My plan was straightforward: get my real estate license, learn everything I could from Margaret, and eventually take over her business when she retired. My parents' reaction to this career choice was predictably lukewarm. Real estate, they implied, wasn't really a profession so much as something people fell into when they couldn't figure out what else to do with themselves. It wasn't prestigious like Emma's marketing career, it wasn't intellectually challenging like law or medicine, and it certainly wasn't the kind of thing that would give them bragging rights at their country club. Emma's reaction was even worse. She acted like I had chosen real estate specifically to embarrass the family, like I was deliberately settling for mediocrity when I could have chosen something more ambitious. She would make comments about how anyone can sell houses, and suggest that I was wasting my potential by focusing on such a basic career path. But I didn't care about their opinions, because for the first time in my life, I was genuinely excited about what I was doing. Every day at Henderson Realty taught me something new. I learned about market analysis and comparable sales, about staging homes and negotiating contracts, about the delicate art of managing clients' expectations while advocating for their best interests. More importantly, I learned that I was good at it. Really good at it. Margaret started giving me more responsibilities. She let me lead showings for certain clients, particularly younger buyers who responded well to my enthusiasm and knowledge about the area's history. She taught me how to read the subtle signs that indicated whether a property was truly a good investment or just attractively priced. She showed me how to build relationships with other agents, with contractors, with loan officers, with all the various professionals who make real estate transactions possible. By my 20th birthday, I had passed my licensing exam and officially become a real estate agent. Margaret threw a small party at the office, with cake from the bakery downtown and champagne that probably cost more than I made in a week. She presented me with a business card holder engraved with my name and the Henderson Realty logo, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely proud of an accomplishment that had nothing to do with Emma. My first sale came 3 months later. A young couple, both teachers, were looking for their first home. They had a modest budget and very specific needs: good school district, safe neighborhood, space for the children they hoped to have someday. I showed them probably 15 houses over the course of 2 months, learning their preferences, understanding their concerns, helping them navigate the complex emotions that come with making such a significant purchase. When we finally found the right house, a 1940s ranch in an established neighborhood, with mature trees and a fenced backyard, I walked them through every step of the buying process. I helped them understand the inspection report, negotiated repairs with the seller, coordinated with their loan officer to ensure their financing went smoothly. The day we closed, the wife hugged me and said I had made their dreams come true. That evening, I called my parents to share the news. I had just facilitated the biggest financial decision these clients would probably ever make, had earned my first commission, had officially launched my career. My mother's response was to ask if Emma had heard about my little sale, and to mention that Emma had just been promoted to senior account manager at her firm. Emma's reaction was even more dismissive. She congratulated me with the kind of tone people use when a child shows them a crayon drawing, patted me on the head metaphorically, and then changed the subject to her latest work project. It stung, but I was learning not to need their validation. Margaret's pride in my success meant more to me than my family's indifference. Over the next 2 years, I threw myself into building my career with a single-minded determination that surprised even me. I worked evenings and weekends, took every continuing education course I could find, joined the local chamber of commerce, volunteered for community events, where I could network and build relationships. I studied the market obsessively, learning the intricacies of every neighborhood in our county, understanding the factors that drove property values, developing an intuitive sense for which homes would sell quickly and which would sit on the market. Margaret was impressed with my dedication, but she was even more impressed with my results. In my second year, I sold more homes than any other agent at Henderson Realty, except Margaret herself. I was building a reputation as someone who really listened to clients, who worked tirelessly to find them exactly what they needed, who made the stressful process of buying or selling a home as smooth as possible. I specialized in first-time homebuyers and families looking to upgrade, but I also developed a niche working with older residents who were downsizing after decades in their family homes. These clients appreciated my patience and my genuine interest in their stories. I would sit in their living rooms for hours, listening to them talk about the memories they had made in their homes, understanding what it meant for them to let go of these spaces where they had raised children and celebrated holidays and weathered life's inevitable storms. One of my most meaningful sales involved helping an elderly woman named Ruth Peterson sell the house where she had lived for 43 years. Her husband had died the previous spring, and her children were pressuring her to move into a smaller, more manageable place. Ruth was heartbroken about leaving her garden, her neighbors, the home where every room held precious memories. I spent 3 months working with Ruth, not just to prepare her house for market, but to help her process the emotional complexity of this transition. I connected her with a moving company that specialized in helping seniors downsize. I found her a beautiful apartment in a community where she could continue gardening in shared spaces. I even helped her choose which furniture would work in her new space, and which pieces should be donated to families who could use them. When Ruth's house sold, she cried happy tears and told me I had been an angel during one of the most difficult periods of her life. That commission check was significant, but what mattered more was knowing that I had genuinely helped someone navigate a major life change with dignity and grace. By the time I turned 22, I was earning more money than I had ever imagined possible. I was able to move out of my parents' house and into a charming apartment above the antique store on Main Street. I bought my first car, a reliable used Honda that I paid for in cash. I started a savings account and began thinking seriously about my long-term financial goals. More importantly, I was building a life that felt authentically mine. I had clients who trusted me completely, colleagues who respected my work, a mentor who believed in my potential. I was contributing to my community in a meaningful way, helping families find homes where they could build their futures. For the first time since childhood, I felt genuinely confident about who I was and where I was headed. Margaret began talking seriously about retirement. She was 67, had been working in real estate for over 30 years, and wanted to spend more time traveling with her sister. She started including me in more strategic discussions about the business, teaching me about the financial side of running an agency, introducing me to her long-term clients as her eventual successor. The plan was for me to gradually take on more responsibility over the next few years, eventually buying out Margaret's share of the business when she was ready to retire completely. It was an incredible opportunity, the chance to own an established real estate agency in a growing market, to build on the foundation Margaret had created, while adding my own vision and expertise. I was 23, and finally felt like my life was falling into place. I had found my calling, built meaningful relationships, established financial independence, and created a clear path toward future success. I was proud of what I had accomplished, excited about what came next, and confident that I had chosen the right direction for my life. That confidence lasted until the day Emma decided she wanted to get into real estate. It started innocuously enough. Emma had been working in marketing for 7 years, climbing steadily up the corporate ladder, earning excellent money and all the recognition that came with working for a prestigious firm. But she had grown tired of the long hours and constant travel, tired of creating campaigns for products she didn't personally care about, tired of working in an industry where creativity was constantly constrained by committee decisions and budget limitations. She mentioned at Sunday dinner that she was thinking about making a career change, something that would give her more control over her schedule and her income. My parents immediately began brainstorming possibilities. Law school, perhaps, or maybe an MBA program that would open doors to executive-level positions. Emma nodded thoughtfully at their suggestions, but I could tell she had already made up her mind about something. 2 weeks later, she announced her decision. She was going to get her real estate license and start selling luxury properties. She had researched the market and determined that there was significant money to be made in high-end residential sales, particularly given the influx of wealthy professionals moving to our area from Chicago. She had already enrolled in the licensing course and planned to affiliate with Prestige Properties, the newer, more upscale real estate firm that had opened a branch office in our town 3 years earlier. The reaction around the dinner table was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. My father talked about how Emma's marketing background would give her a huge advantage in real estate, how her professional network would translate into valuable referrals, how her natural charisma and polished presentation would appeal to affluent clients. My mother gushed about how perfect this career change was, how Emma would obviously excel at real estate just as she had excelled at everything else. I sat quietly, pushing food around on my plate, trying to process what this meant for my own career.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Emma wasn't just getting into real estate, she was positioning herself as direct competition. Millbrook wasn't a large town, and the luxury market was relatively small. There were maybe a dozen high-end properties that sold each year, properties that generated the kind of commissions that could significantly impact an agent's annual income. More troubling was the way my family was already treating Emma's career change as inevitable success, while simultaneously diminishing my own established achievements. My father made some comment about how Emma would probably revolutionize real estate in our area, bringing sophisticated marketing strategies and professional polish to an industry that had been pretty casual up until now. My mother nodded and said it would be wonderful to finally have a real estate agent in the family, completely ignoring the fact that I had been licensed and actively selling homes for over 2 years. Emma herself seemed oblivious to how her announcement affected me, or maybe she just didn't care. She talked enthusiastically about her plans, about the high-end marketing materials she would create, about the networking events she would host, about the ways she could leverage her corporate experience to attract sophisticated clients who expected a higher level of service than they typically received from local agents. I tried to be supportive, or at least neutral, but privately I was worried. Emma had a track record of not just succeeding at whatever she attempted, but of dominating completely. If she brought the same intensity and strategic thinking to real estate that she had brought to her marketing career, she wouldn't just be competition, she would be overwhelming competition. My concerns proved justified almost immediately. Emma passed her licensing exam on the first try and immediately began implementing an aggressive marketing strategy that put every other agent in town to shame. She hired a professional photographer to create headshots that belonged in a magazine. She designed business cards and brochures with the kind of sophisticated graphics and high-quality paper that screamed expensive and exclusive. She launched a website that looked like it had been created for a Fortune 500 company, complete with virtual tours, market analysis tools, and testimonials from colleagues at her previous job. More significantly, Emma began targeting exactly the kind of clients I had been hoping to work with as my career developed. She hosted wine tastings and cocktail parties designed to attract affluent professionals, networking events where she could showcase her marketing expertise and corporate connections. She positioned herself not just as a real estate agent, but as a lifestyle consultant who understood the sophisticated needs of upscale buyers. Within 6 months, Emma had listed and sold 3 luxury properties, generating more commission in half a year than I typically made in 12 months. The local newspaper featured her in an article about successful young professionals in our community. The Chamber of Commerce invited her to speak at their monthly meeting about innovative marketing strategies for local businesses. My parents were beside themselves with pride. Emma had not only succeeded in real estate, she had immediately established herself as the premier agent for high-end properties in our market. They talked about her success constantly, sharing details of her latest sales with relatives and friends, clipping newspaper articles about her achievements, treating her real estate career like it was somehow more legitimate and impressive than mine had ever been. The most painful part wasn't even Emma's success itself, it was the way my family began treating my own career as somehow lesser in comparison. My mother would ask about my latest sales with a tone that suggested she was being polite rather than genuinely interested, and then pivot immediately to sharing Emma's latest accomplishments. My father would nod approvingly when I mentioned a closing, then launch into detailed descriptions of Emma's sophisticated marketing strategies and impressive client roster. It felt like being erased in slow motion. For 3 years I had been building something meaningful and significant, establishing myself as a knowledgeable and trustworthy agent, creating relationships with clients who valued my expertise and dedication. But now that Emma was in the same field, my accomplishments seemed to disappear from my family's awareness, overshadowed by her immediate and dramatic success. I tried to maintain perspective, reminding myself that there was room for multiple successful agents in our market, that Emma's success didn't diminish my own achievements, that I had built something valuable and meaningful that couldn't be taken away simply because someone else was also succeeding. I focused on my clients, on the families I was helping find their dream homes, on the relationships I had built with colleagues and other professionals in the community. But it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the way Emma's entrance into real estate was changing everything about how my family perceived my career and my potential. What had once been a source of personal pride and financial independence was now being treated as a minor sideline compared to Emma's obviously superior approach to the profession. The situation became even more complicated when Margaret Henderson announced that she was accelerating her retirement timeline. Her sister had been diagnosed with a serious illness, and Margaret wanted to spend her remaining healthy years traveling and making memories while she still could. Instead of the gradual transition we had planned, Margaret needed to step back from the business much more quickly. This should have been the opportunity I had been preparing for, the chance to take ownership of an established agency and build on the foundation I had spent 3 years helping to create. But Margaret was concerned about whether I was ready to handle the financial and managerial responsibilities of running the business, particularly given the increased competition from agents like Emma, who were bringing more sophisticated marketing approaches to the local market. We had several difficult conversations about the future of Henderson Realty. Margaret believed in my abilities and wanted to see me succeed, but she was also realistic about the challenges I would face competing against agents with more resources and more polished presentation. She suggested that I might want to consider partnering with another agent or joining a larger firm that could provide more support and marketing resources. The implication was clear: my small-town approach to real estate, which had served me well for 3 years, might not be sufficient in a market that was becoming increasingly competitive and sophisticated. Emma's immediate success had raised the bar for what clients expected, and I would need to significantly upgrade my own approach if I wanted to remain competitive. I spent weeks agonizing over this decision. Joining a larger firm would mean giving up my dream of owning Henderson Realty, but it might also provide the resources and support I needed to compete more effectively. Trying to take over Margaret's business would be financially risky and professionally challenging, but it would allow me to maintain the independence and client relationships I had worked so hard to build. Ultimately, I decided to take the risk. I used my savings to secure a loan that would allow me to buy out Margaret's share of the business. I upgraded my marketing materials, invested in better technology, and began offering additional services like professional staging and photography. I was determined to prove that I could compete successfully against Emma and anyone else who entered our market. For a few months it seemed like my strategy was working. I was booking more listings, attracting new clients, generating higher commissions. My relationship with Margaret remained strong even after she officially retired, and she continued to refer clients to me and provide advice when I needed guidance. I was proud of myself for taking on this challenge and confident that I could build Henderson Realty into an even more successful business. That confidence lasted until the morning I arrived at the office to find Emma sitting behind my desk with a stack of files spread in front of her and my computer logged into my client database. The morning light streaming through the office windows felt different that Tuesday, harsher somehow, like it was illuminating something I wasn't supposed to see. Emma looked up from my computer screen with the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes, the practiced expression she used to wear during corporate presentations when she was about to deliver bad news disguised as opportunity. "Good morning, little sister," she said, her fingers still moving across my keyboard with unsettling familiarity. "I hope you don't mind, but I needed to borrow your office for a few minutes. The Wi-Fi at Prestige Properties has been acting up all morning." I stood frozen in the doorway, my coffee growing cold in my hands as I tried to process what I was seeing. Emma wasn't just using my computer, she was actively scrolling through files, clicking between windows, her eyes scanning information with the focused intensity of someone conducting research rather than someone checking email. "What are you doing?" The question came out smaller than I intended, almost tentative, like I was the one intruding instead of the person who actually owned this office. Emma's laugh was light and dismissive, the sound she made when she thought someone was being unnecessarily dramatic. "Oh, this. I was just curious about how smaller agencies organize their client information. It's fascinating, really, how different our systems are. At Prestige, we use this incredibly sophisticated CRM software that tracks everything from initial contact through closing and beyond. It generates detailed analytics about client preferences, referral patterns, market trends, very cutting-edge stuff." She gestured toward my screen as she spoke, and I caught a glimpse of my client database displayed in the background. Names, phone numbers, email addresses, property preferences, personal notes about families and their specific needs. 3 years of carefully cultivated relationships reduced to data points on a monitor. "Your setup is much more personal," Emma continued, finally standing up from my chair. "Very old school. I can see why Margaret Henderson was successful for so many years using this approach. There's something charming about keeping everything so simple and straightforward." The word charming landed like a slap. Emma had perfected the art of delivering insults wrapped in compliments, of making criticism sound like benevolent observation. She was telling me that my business practices were quaint and outdated while simultaneously implying that her own methods were more sophisticated and effective. I set my coffee down on the reception desk and walked toward my office, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "I need you to step away from my computer, Emma. This is client confidential information." "Of course," she said immediately, her hands raised in mock surrender. "I completely understand. Client confidentiality is absolutely crucial in this business. I would never want to compromise anyone's privacy or create any ethical issues." But even as she spoke, I noticed that she didn't immediately move away from the desk. Instead, she seemed to be memorizing something on the screen, her eyes making one final sweep across the information displayed there before she finally stepped aside. "I was actually hoping we could talk," Emma said, settling herself into one of the client chairs across from my desk. "About the market, about how we might approach this whole situation professionally. I know it might feel awkward, having family members working in the same field, but I think there's a way for both of us to be successful without stepping on each other's toes." I sat down in my chair, which still held the warmth from Emma's body, and tried to appear calm and professional. "What kind of approach did you have in mind?" Emma leaned forward slightly, adopting the posture she used to use during strategic planning meetings at her old job. "Well, I've been thinking about market segmentation. It seems to me that we naturally appeal to different types of clients. You've built this wonderful reputation with first-time homebuyers and families looking for affordable starter homes. People really trust you to help them navigate the basics of real estate transactions." She paused, letting that characterization settle between us. First-time buyers and starter homes. The basics of real estate transactions. She was defining my clientele as entry-level, positioning my expertise as fundamental rather than sophisticated. "Meanwhile," Emma continued, "my background gives me some natural advantages with luxury buyers and investors, people who are looking for more complex transactions and high-level strategic advice. Corporate relocations, estate sales, investment properties. Clients who need someone who understands advanced marketing strategies and can navigate more complicated financial structures." It was a neat division on the surface. Emma would handle the high-end market while I focused on modest transactions. She would work with sophisticated buyers while I helped families find their first homes. It sounded reasonable, even collaborative, except for the fact that it would effectively cap my earning potential and limit my professional growth indefinitely. "That's an interesting perspective," I said carefully. "But I'm not sure the market divides quite that cleanly. I've worked with clients across all price ranges, and I think most good agents develop expertise in multiple market segments over time." Emma nodded thoughtfully, as if she were genuinely considering my point. "You're absolutely right, the market is much more fluid than that. Which is why I think communication is going to be so important. We'll want to make sure we're not accidentally competing for the same clients or duplicating efforts unnecessarily." There was something in her tone that made me uneasy, a subtle implication that competition between us would be accidental rather than natural, that duplicated efforts would be wasteful rather than simply how business worked in a free market. "I'm not sure I follow," I said. "Well, for instance, I noticed you have several clients in your database who might be interested in upgrading to larger homes in the next year or two. Young families who've outgrown their starter homes, professionals whose incomes have increased significantly, that sort of thing. Those kinds of clients often need someone who can help them navigate more complex transactions, someone who understands luxury market dynamics." My stomach clenched. She was talking about my clients, people I had worked with for years, relationships I had built through patience and dedication and genuine care for their needs. The Johnsons who had bought their first home through me 3 years ago and were now expecting their second child. The Patels who had started with a modest condo and were now ready to buy the larger house they had been dreaming of. The Williams, whose business had grown so successfully that they were looking at properties twice the size of their current home.
Those are my clients, Emma. I've been working with them for years. They trust me to help them with their next purchase when they're ready. Emma's expression remained perfectly pleasant, but something shifted in her eyes. Of course they are. I would never suggest otherwise. I'm just thinking that if any of them expressed interest in luxury properties, properties that might be outside your usual area of expertise, it might be helpful for them to have access to someone with more specialized knowledge of that market segment. She was being so careful with her language, so diplomatic in her phrasing, but the message was unmistakable. She believed that my clients would be better served by working with her when they were ready to make more significant purchases. She was positioning herself as the obvious choice for anyone looking to move beyond basic real estate transactions. "I think my clients are perfectly happy with the level of service I provide," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I'm confident in my ability to help them with any type of property purchase they might be considering." "Oh, absolutely," Emma said quickly. "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. You've obviously built wonderful relationships with your clients. I just think it's important for all of us to be realistic about our individual strengths and limitations." Strengths and limitations. She was framing my established client relationships as limitations, suggesting that my expertise had natural boundaries that would prevent me from serving my clients effectively as their needs became more sophisticated. We talked for another 20 minutes, Emma maintaining her diplomatic tone while systematically undermining everything I had built over the past 3 years. She questioned whether I had the marketing resources to effectively promote higher-end listings. She wondered aloud whether my current client base provided sufficient referral opportunities for luxury buyers. She suggested that my office location and presentation might not project the right image for affluent clients. Every concern was framed as friendly advice, every criticism disguised as collaborative brainstorming, but the cumulative effect was devastating. Emma was making it clear that she considered my approach to real estate fundamentally inadequate for anything beyond entry-level transactions, and she was positioning herself as the obvious solution for any client who wanted to move beyond my limited capabilities. When she finally left, promising to continue this conversation soon, I sat alone in my office feeling like I had just been professionally dissected. Emma hadn't directly threatened me or made any explicit demands, but she had made her intentions crystal clear. She didn't just want to compete in the same market, she wanted to redefine the market in a way that would relegate me to a permanent junior position. Over the next few weeks, I began noticing subtle changes in how other professionals in the community interacted with me. The loan officer at the bank seemed less enthusiastic when I brought in pre-approval requests. The title company started asking more detailed questions about my transactions, as if they were double-checking my competence. Other real estate agents began treating me with a kind of polite condescension that felt familiar and terrible. Emma was networking aggressively, attending every professional meeting and community event, introducing herself to everyone who might influence real estate transactions in our area. But she wasn't just building her own relationships, she was subtly repositioning the entire market's perception of what constituted professional competence and sophisticated service. I heard through the grapevine that Emma had hosted a wine tasting for local business leaders, ostensibly as a networking event but actually as a platform for her to discuss the future of real estate in our community. According to several attendees, She had spoken eloquently about the need for more sophisticated marketing approaches, more advanced technology solutions, more strategic thinking about market positioning. She never mentioned me directly, but the implications were obvious to anyone who knew that her sister worked for the smaller, more traditional agency across town. Emma was establishing herself as the representative of progress and professionalism while implicitly characterizing any other approach as outdated and inadequate. The real blow came when I lost the Patterson listing. The Pattersons were a retired couple who owned a beautiful Victorian home on one of the most prestigious streets in our historic district. I had been cultivating this relationship for over a year, visiting them regularly, helping them understand current market conditions, preparing them for the eventual sale of their family home. Mrs. Patterson called me on a Thursday morning to let me know they had decided to list with Emma instead. She was apologetic but firm, explaining that Emma had presented them with a comprehensive marketing strategy that included professional staging, virtual reality tours, and targeted advertising in luxury lifestyle magazines. Emma had convinced them that their home deserved more sophisticated promotion than traditional real estate marketing could provide. "It's nothing personal, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice gentle but decisive. "You're a lovely girl, and we know you work very hard. But this house is our most valuable asset, and we need to ensure it receives the kind of professional attention that will maximize its value." Emma showed us marketing materials from her previous sales, and frankly, the difference in presentation quality was quite striking. I hung up the phone and stared at my computer screen for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. The Patterson listing would have been worth more than any single commission I had ever earned. More importantly, it would have established my credibility in the luxury market, proving that I could successfully represent high-end properties and sophisticated clients. Instead, that opportunity had gone to Emma, along with the credibility and future referrals that would have come with it. She had used her corporate marketing background and professional presentation skills to position herself as the obvious choice for discerning sellers, while implicitly suggesting that my approach was insufficiently polished for their needs. That afternoon, I drove past the Patterson house and saw Emma's sign in the front yard. It was larger than the signs I typically used, printed on higher quality material, with elegant typography and a sophisticated color scheme that looked more like luxury brand advertising than traditional real estate marketing. Even the sign itself was sending a message about the level of service and professionalism that Emma brought to her listings. I realized that Emma wasn't just competing with me for individual clients, she was systematically repositioning the entire market's understanding of what constituted professional real estate service. She was establishing new standards for presentation, marketing, and client communication that would make my current approach seem inadequate by comparison. The pattern continued over the following months. Emma landed the Morrison estate sale, a property that should have been a natural fit for my expertise in historic homes. She secured the listing for the new construction development on the outskirts of town, a project that would generate multiple sales over the next 2 years. She began working with corporate relocation clients, executives moving to our area from Chicago and Milwaukee, who needed someone who could understand their sophisticated expectations and timeline constraints. Each success built on the previous one, creating momentum that seemed to make Emma's continued success inevitable. She was featured in the regional real estate magazine as an agent to watch. She spoke at a conference about innovative marketing strategies for luxury properties. She joined the board of the local Economic Development Council, positioning herself as a thought leader in our community's business landscape. Meanwhile, my own business began to start. I was still closing transactions, still helping families find homes, still maintaining the relationships I had built over the years. But I wasn't growing, wasn't attracting new clients at the rate I had in previous years, wasn't generating the kind of income that would allow me to expand my services or invest in better marketing materials. The most frustrating part was that I couldn't point to anything specific that Emma was doing wrong. She wasn't stealing my clients directly or engaging in any unethical business practices. She was simply leveraging her natural advantages, her corporate background, her polished presentation skills, her her ability to project sophistication and success. But the cumulative effect was devastating to my confidence and my professional prospects. I began second-guessing decisions I had made confidently for years. I questioned whether my client communication style was professional enough, whether my marketing materials projected the right image, whether my office space adequately reflected my competence and credibility. I found myself constantly comparing my approach to Emma's, wondering whether I should invest in expensive marketing upgrades, whether I should try to adopt more corporate language and presentation styles, whether I should abandon the personal, relationship-focused approach that had always felt natural to me. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in October when I discovered that Emma had systematically contacted every client in my database, ostensibly to introduce herself as another local real estate professional, but actually to evaluate their potential for future luxury transactions. I found out because Mrs. Chen, one of my longtime clients, called to ask whether I had given Emma permission to contact her about upgrading to a larger home. Chen had bought her current house through me 2 years earlier, and had mentioned in passing that she might consider moving someday if her husband's business continued to grow. She was very professional, Mrs. Chen explained, but it felt a little strange to receive a call from someone I had never heard of who seemed to know so much about my personal situation and my property history. She mentioned that she had reviewed my file, and thought I might be ready for a larger home in a more prestigious neighborhood. My blood turned to ice. Emma had reviewed Mrs. Chen's file. That meant she had accessed my client database, studied my notes about Mrs. Chen's family situation and financial status, and used that information to contact her directly about potentially working with a different agent. I called 3 other clients from my database, and discovered that Emma had contacted all of them with similar pitches. She had presented herself as a specialist in luxury transactions, who might be better equipped to help them when they were ready to make their next move. She had been careful not to directly criticize my services, but she had clearly implied that their future real estate needs might exceed my capabilities. That evening, I sat in my apartment above the antique store and tried to decide what to do. Emma hadn't technically done anything illegal. Client information isn't protected by privacy laws in the same way that medical or financial records are, and real estate agents often share referrals and collaborate on transactions. But what Emma had done felt like a fundamental violation of professional boundaries and family loyalty. She had used her access to my office and my computer to systematically undermine my client relationships, positioning herself as a superior alternative, while disguising her outreach as friendly professional networking. I could confront her directly, but I knew that Emma would deny any malicious intent and frame her actions as legitimate business development. I could report her behavior to the Real Estate Commission, but proving that she had acted unethically would be difficult when her methods had been so subtle and professionally executed. More importantly, I realized that this situation was about much more than a single breach of professional boundaries. Emma hadn't just accessed my client database. She had demonstrated that she viewed my entire business as fair game for her own advancement. She wasn't content to compete with me in the open market. She was actively working to absorb my client base and eliminate me as competition. The next morning, I arrived at my office early and spent 2 hours changing all my passwords, securing my computer systems, and implementing new privacy protocols. I printed out my complete client database and stored hard copies in a locked filing cabinet. I backed up all my files to a secure external drive that I could take home each evening. Then I called Margaret Henderson and asked if we could meet for coffee. I needed advice from someone who understood both the real estate business and the complicated dynamics of family relationships. Margaret had always been a mentor to me, and I trusted her judgment about professional and personal matters. We met at the cafe downtown, the same place where Margaret had first suggested that I might have a future in real estate. She listened patiently while I explained what had been happening, how Emma had positioned herself in the market, how she had accessed my client information and used it to undermine my relationships. Margaret's expression grew increasingly serious as I spoke. When I finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I've been wondering when something like this would happen," she said finally. "I've been watching Emma's approach to the market, and while I admire her marketing skills and professional presentation, I've been concerned about her long-term strategy. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. What Emma is doing is perfectly legal, but it's not necessarily ethical. And more importantly for you, it's not sustainable. She's building her business by positioning herself as superior to other agents rather than by providing genuinely superior service. That works in the short term, but it creates enemies and resentment that will eventually limit her growth. Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. But that doesn't solve your immediate problem. Emma has successfully repositioned herself as the premium choice in this market, and she's systematically undermining your client relationships. You need to decide whether you want to compete with her directly, or find a different way to build your business. What would competing directly look like? I asked. Investment in marketing, technology and presentation that would match or exceed what Emma is offering. Professional photography, sophisticated marketing materials, enhanced client communication systems. Probably $50,000 to $75,000 in upgrades over the next year, plus ongoing expenses for maintaining that level of presentation. The number hit me like a physical blow. I didn't have that kind of money, and taking on that level of debt would be financially dangerous for a business that was already struggling to grow. What would be the alternative? I asked.
Margaret smiled sadly, finding a niche that Emma can't or won't compete in, specializing in a market segment that doesn't interest her. Building your business in a way that plays to your natural strengths rather than trying to match her corporate advantages. We talked for another hour about possible strategies, potential niches, ways I might differentiate my services from Emma's approach. But underneath all the practical discussion was a deeper realization that felt like grief. For 3 years, I had been building toward a future where I could compete successfully in all segments of the real estate market, where I could grow my business and my expertise without artificial limitations. Emma's entry into the field hadn't just created competition, it had fundamentally altered the trajectory of my career. I could continue working in real estate, probably successfully, but I would need to accept a smaller role, a limited market segment, a ceiling on my professional growth that hadn't existed before Emma decided she wanted to sell houses too. That evening, I sat in my office after hours, looking at the client files that represented 3 years of relationship building and professional development. I thought about all the families I had helped find their first homes, all the sellers who had trusted me with their most valuable assets, all the dreams and plans and futures that had been shaped by successful real estate transactions. I loved this work, truly loved helping people navigate one of the most important financial decisions of their lives. But I was beginning to understand that love might not be enough to sustain a career in a market that was being systematically redefined by someone with more resources, more sophisticated presentation skills, and fewer scruples about how they achieved success. The phone rang, interrupting my brooding. It was Emma, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hi, little sister. I wanted to let you know about an exciting opportunity that just came up. There's a beautiful estate property coming on the market next month, and the sellers are looking for an agent team to handle the sale. I immediately thought of you. It would be a wonderful chance for you to learn about luxury marketing while I handle the more complex aspects of the transaction. What do you think?" An agent team. She was offering to let me assist her with a high-end listing, to play a supporting role while she managed the sophisticated elements of the sale. It was professional charity, disguised as collaboration. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said, "but I prefer to handle my own listings." "Of course you do. I completely understand. I just thought it might be a good learning experience. But you're absolutely right to focus on building your own client base. Speaking of which, I hope you don't mind, but Mrs. Patel mentioned that she and her husband are thinking about upgrading to a larger home. I took the liberty of sending her some information about properties in Oakwood Estates. I thought you'd want to know that she might be ready for a more luxury-focused agent." She had done it again, used her contact with one of my clients to position herself as the logical choice for their next transaction, while framing it as helpful information sharing. "Mrs. Patel is my client, Emma. If she's ready to look at new properties, she'll contact me." "Oh, absolutely. I would never interfere with your client relationships. I just wanted to make sure she knew about all her options. After all, we both want what's best for the clients, right?" After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my office and finally admitted to myself what had been true for months. Emma wasn't just competing with me, she was systematically dismantling everything I had built.
And she was doing it with such professional polish and family loyalty rhetoric that I couldn't even effectively protest without seeming petty and unprofessional. But tomorrow was her housewarming party, and I had made a decision about how to respond to this situation. I wasn't going to fight Emma on her terms anymore. I was going to change the game entirely. The champagne glass felt surprisingly steady in my hand as I stood up in Emma's perfectly decorated living room, surrounded by the same people who had watched her systematically dismantle my career over the past 18 months. The room fell silent, except for the soft jazz playing from her hidden speakers and the distant sound of someone's nervous laughter being quickly stifled. Emma's face went through a fascinating series of micro-expressions. First confusion, then concern, then something that looked almost like fear before settling into her practiced professional smile. She was still holding her own glass, frozen halfway between a toast and a defensive position. "I have an announcement too," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room filled with real estate agents, bank executives, city council members, and various other professionals who comprised our town's business elite. "But first I want to thank Emma for teaching me something valuable about family and business." The silence deepened. I could see my parents near the kitchen doorway, my mother's hand pressed to her chest in that gesture she made when she was preparing to be mortified by something I might say. My father had that blank expression he wore when he was calculating how much damage control a situation might require. "You see," I continued, looking directly at Emma, "my sister taught me that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them. And more importantly, you should act accordingly." I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope, the kind lawyers use for important documents. The weight of it felt substantial in my hands, months of careful preparation reduced to paper and signatures and legal terminology. "Emma deleted every single contact from my business database 2 weeks ago," I said, watching the room's attention sharpen like a blade. "Every client relationship I had built over 4 years, every potential lead I had cultivated, every referral source I had developed, gone." And when I confronted her about it, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Competition is over." A ripple of shocked murmurs went through the crowd. I saw several people turn to look at Emma, whose professional smile had completely disappeared. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, apparently calculating her response. "What Emma didn't know," I continued, "is that I had been preparing for something like this for months. Because when someone systematically undermines your business while smiling at you across the dinner table every Sunday, you start to see patterns." I opened the envelope and pulled out the first document, holding it up so the room could see the official letterhead. "This is a purchase agreement for the Riverside Shopping Center on Highway 94. 15 commercial units, currently generating over $200,000 in annual rental income, with significant development potential for expansion." The room was completely silent now. I could hear someone's breathing, the soft hum of Emma's refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. "I signed this agreement 3 days ago," I said. "Cash purchase, no financing contingencies, closing in 2 weeks. I'm transitioning from residential real estate to commercial property investment and development." I pulled out another document. "This is a partnership agreement with Morrison Construction, the largest general contracting firm in the county. We're developing the vacant lot behind the shopping center into a mixed-use complex. Retail on the ground floor, professional offices on the second floor, residential lofts on the third floor." More murmurs, louder this time. I saw Daniel Morrison nod from across the room, confirming what I had just announced. He and I had been negotiating this partnership for weeks, ever since I had approached him with a business plan that would leverage his construction expertise and my knowledge of local market conditions. "And this," I said, pulling out a third document, "is a management contract with Hartwell Property Group. They'll be handling day-to-day operations for my commercial properties, while I focus on identifying and developing additional investment opportunities." I folded the documents carefully and placed them back in the envelope. "I want to thank Emma for helping me realize that competing with her in residential real estate was never going to be a fair fight. She has advantages I'll never have, resources I can't match, and a willingness to do things I would never do." Emma finally found her voice. "Sarah, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I would never delete your client database. That's not only unethical, it's probably illegal." I smiled at her, the same kind of smile she had been giving me for months. You're absolutely right, Emma. It is illegal, which is why I filed a police report and a complaint with the State Real Estate Commission before I came here tonight. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, asking questions, demanding explanations. I could see several real estate agents pulling out their phones, probably texting colleagues about what they were witnessing. This would be the talk of every professional meeting in town for months. The police traced the database deletion to your laptop, I continued, raising my voice to be heard over the commotion. Apparently you forgot that digital actions leave digital footprints. Your computer accessed my office network at 11:37 p.m. on October 15th, the night after you asked to borrow my office because your internet was down. Emma's face had gone pale. She was looking around the room as if searching for support, but most of the guests were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Professional reputation was everything in our business community, and what I had just described wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. You're lying, Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're making this up because you're jealous of my success. I pulled my phone from my purse and held it up so the room could see the screen. This is Detective Rodriguez from the Cybercrime Unit. Would you like to speak with him directly? Emma stared at the phone, then at me, then at the crowd of people who were now clearly on my side. She had built her reputation on being sophisticated and professional, on representing the highest standards of business ethics. What I had just revealed wasn't just damaging to her career, it was potentially devastating. But wait, I said, putting my phone away. That's not even the best part. I reached back into the envelope and pulled out one final document. This is a copy of the client list that Emma downloaded from my database. Not just the contact information, but all my personal notes about their families, their financial situations, their long-term plans, information that she then used to contact them directly and try to steal them away from me. I held up the document so people could see the detailed spreadsheet format. Emma didn't just delete my database to sabotage my business. She copied it first, so she could use my 4 years of relationship building to advance her own career. Every client meeting I had documented, every personal detail I had noted, every business insight I had developed, she downloaded it all and used it against me. The reaction this time was immediate and intense. People were shaking their heads, making disgusted sounds, calling Emma's behavior unforgivable. Several real estate agents were looking at her with obvious anger, probably thinking about their own client databases, and wondering if Emma might target them next. Marcus Webb, the president of our local real estate association, stepped forward from the crowd. Emma, if these allegations are true, you're looking at criminal charges and the immediate suspension of your real estate license. Emma was trapped, and she knew it. She couldn't deny the evidence, couldn't explain away the digital trail, couldn't maintain her professional facade when faced with proof of what she had done. For the first time since I had known her, Emma looked genuinely vulnerable. "Sarah," she said, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it, "we're family, surely we can work this out privately." I looked at her for a long moment, thinking about all the Sunday dinners where she had dismissed my accomplishments, all the times she had positioned herself as superior to me, all the months she had spent systematically undermining everything I had worked to build. "We are family," I agreed. "Which makes what you did even worse." I turned to address the room, but I didn't come here tonight to destroy Emma's career, even though she certainly destroyed mine. I came here to announce my new venture and to thank all of you for the lessons you've taught me about business and competition. I pulled out a stack of business cards and began distributing them to the guests. Martinez Commercial Properties. We specialize in identifying undervalued commercial real estate and developing it into profitable mixed-use projects. We're currently looking for investors who understand that the future of our downtown district depends on thoughtful development that balances commercial viability with community character. The mood in the room shifted immediately. Instead of focusing on Emma's scandal, people were suddenly interested in discussing my business plans. Daniel Morrison started explaining the mixed-use project to a group of potential investors. 2 city council members approached me about a redevelopment initiative they had been considering. The banker who had been so dismissive when I was selling houses suddenly wanted to discuss commercial lending opportunities. I learned something important from watching Emma's success. I told the crowd, she understood that positioning and perception matter as much as actual competence. She was right about that. Where she went wrong was thinking she had to tear other people down to build herself up. I gestured toward the business cards people were studying. Commercial real estate development is about creating value, not just capturing it. It's about building something that benefits the entire community, not just extracting profit from other people's work. Margaret Henderson, who had been standing quietly near the windows, walked over and gave me a hug. "I always knew you had the vision for something bigger," she said. "I'm proud of you for finding your own path." Over the next hour, I had more substantial business conversations than I had experienced in my entire residential real estate career. People who had never taken me seriously as a house seller were suddenly very interested in my development projects and investment strategies. The change in how they perceived me was immediate and dramatic. Emma tried several times to approach me, probably hoping to negotiate some kind of damage control, but I was surrounded by people wanting to discuss business opportunities. Every time she moved in my direction, someone else would engage me in conversation about commercial properties or development possibilities. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing on Emma's back deck with a small group of investors who were seriously interested in funding my next project. We were discussing the potential for developing the old warehouse district when Emma finally cornered me. "We need to talk," she said, her professional composure completely gone. Privately, I looked at the investors who were tactfully pretending not to listen to our conversation. "Actually, Emma, I think we've said everything we need to say to each other. You can't do this to me," she said, her voice desperate. "I made a mistake. Okay, I was under a lot of pressure and I made some bad decisions. But you're talking about destroying my entire career over one incident." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by her ability to minimize what she had done. "One incident. Emma, you spent 18 months systematically undermining my business. You used family dinners to gather intelligence about my clients. You pretended to offer collaboration while you were actually planning to eliminate me as competition. And when subtle sabotage wasn't working fast enough, you committed a felony. It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Emma said, and for the first time I heard something that sounded like genuine remorse in her voice. "I just wanted to succeed. I wanted to prove that I could be the best at something new. You could have been successful without destroying me," I said. "The market was big enough for both of us. But you couldn't stand the idea of sharing success with anyone, especially not your little sister." Emma was quiet for a moment, staring out at the carefully landscaped backyard that represented everything she had built in her new career. "What happens now? Now you deal with the consequences of your choices," I said, "just like I had to deal with the consequences of yours." I started to walk away, then turned back. "For what it's worth, Emma, you taught me something valuable. You showed me that I was thinking too small, limiting myself to competing in markets where someone else had already set the rules. Commercial development doesn't have those limitations. Success isn't about beating other people, it's about creating value that didn't exist before." The police investigation took 3 weeks. Emma hired an expensive lawyer who tried to argue that accessing my computer system was a misunderstanding rather than a deliberate crime, but the digital evidence was overwhelming. She had not only deleted my files, she had copied them first, clearly demonstrating intent to use my client information for her own benefit. The Real Estate Commission suspended her license pending the outcome of the criminal case. Prestige Properties terminated her contract, citing ethics violations that could expose the firm to liability. The local real estate association expelled her from membership, effectively ending her ability to practice in our market. Emma ultimately pleaded guilty to computer fraud and paid substantial fines, though she avoided jail time. The conviction meant that she could never hold a real estate license again in our state, and her professional reputation was destroyed completely. But the criminal case was almost secondary to the social and professional consequences. Emma had positioned herself as the sophisticated alternative to traditional agents like me, someone who represented higher standards and more ethical business practices. When the truth about her methods became public, the contrast between her polished presentation and her actual behavior made the scandal even more damaging. Meanwhile, my commercial real estate venture exceeded every projection I had made. The Riverside Shopping Center renovation attracted national retailers who had never considered our market before. The mixed-use development behind it was fully leased before construction was completed, with waiting lists for both the commercial and residential spaces. More importantly, the success of these projects established my credibility as a developer and investor. Within 6 months, I was fielding calls from property owners throughout the region who wanted to discuss redevelopment opportunities. Banks that had been reluctant to lend money for residential real estate transactions were eager to finance commercial projects with my name attached. The transformation in how my family treated me was almost as dramatic as the change in my professional status. My parents, who had spent years treating my real estate career as a minor hobby compared to Emma's corporate success, suddenly became very interested in my business accomplishments. My mother started bragging to her friends about my development projects. My father asked detailed questions about my investment strategies and offered to connect me with potential business partners from his golf club. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years I had craved this kind of recognition and support from my family, had desperately wanted them to see my work as valuable and impressive. Now that I finally had their approval, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I had built something that belonged entirely to me, something that created value for other people while generating financial independence for myself. My success wasn't dependent on anyone else's failure, wasn't diminished by competition, wasn't vulnerable to the kind of sabotage that had nearly destroyed my residential real estate career. 6 months after Emma's housewarming party, I attended the grand opening of the renovated Riverside Shopping Center. The mayor was there, along with representatives from the Chamber of Commerce, the Economic Development Council, and various local business organizations. They presented me with a plaque, recognizing my contribution to downtown revitalization, and several people gave speeches about the positive impact my projects were having on the community. As I stood in front of the crowd, looking at the bustling shops and restaurants that had replaced empty storefronts, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Emma's sabotage had been devastating at the time, but it had also forced me to recognize that I had been thinking too small about my own potential. I had been so focused on competing with Emma that I had never considered the possibility of creating an entirely different kind of success, one that didn't depend on winning or losing against other people but on building something valuable and lasting. After the ceremony, I drove past Emma's house on my way home. There was a for sale sign in the front yard, and the carefully maintained landscaping was already starting to look a little wild around the edges. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that Emma was planning to move to another state, to start over in a place where her reputation hadn't been destroyed. I felt a moment of genuine sadness for her, not because I regretted the consequences of her actions, but because she had possessed real talent and intelligence that could have been used constructively instead of destructively. She could have been successful without sabotaging me, could have built an impressive career without compromising her integrity or damaging her family relationships. But Emma had made her choices, just as I had made mine. She had chosen to see success as a zero-sum game, where someone else's achievement diminished her own. I had learned to see success as something that could be created and shared, something that grew when it lifted other people up rather than tearing them down. That evening, I sat in my new office above the renovated shopping center, looking at architectural plans for my next development project. It was a much larger undertaking, a mixed-use complex that would include affordable housing, small business incubators, and community spaces designed to support local entrepreneurs and families. My phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel Morrison, confirming our meeting with potential investors next week. Another message from the City Planning Department, requesting a presentation about sustainable development practices. A third from Margaret Henderson, congratulating me on the day's success and asking if I wanted to join her for dinner to discuss a potential partnership opportunity. I smiled as I read through the messages, remembering the isolation and frustration I had felt just a year ago when Emma was systematically dismantling my residential real estate career. That version of myself could never have imagined the opportunities and relationships I was building now. Emma had deleted my client database and declared that competition was over. She had been right about that, but not in the way she had intended. Competition was over because I had stopped competing and started creating. I had stopped trying to beat other people at their games and started building my own game entirely. The transformation hadn't been easy, and there were still moments when I wondered what might have happened if Emma had chosen collaboration over sabotage, if our family had been capable of celebrating multiple successes instead of anointing a single golden child. But I had learned that some people will always see other people's achievements as threats to their own, and that trying to change those people is less productive than simply building something they can't touch. As I turned off the lights in my office and headed home to my new apartment in the residential tower I had developed, I felt genuinely grateful for everything that had happened, even the painful parts. Emma's betrayal had forced me to discover capabilities I hadn't known I possessed, to take risks I might never have taken, to build something bigger and more meaningful than anything I could have accomplished by staying in my original lane. She had taught me that family loyalty has limits, that professional success requires protecting yourself against people who would use your trust against you, and that sometimes the best response to sabotage is to build something so impressive that the sabotage becomes irrelevant. I never saw Emma again after she moved away, but I heard occasionally through mutual acquaintances that she had struggled to rebuild her career in her new location. The real estate industry is smaller than people realize, and professional reputations follow people across state lines. She had found work in property management, a less lucrative and prestigious field than sales, but one that didn't require the same level of client trust and professional networking. I genuinely hoped that she had learned something from the experience, that she had found a way to build success without tearing other people down. But I also understood that some people never learn those lessons, never develop the capacity for genuine collaboration and mutual support. For my part, I had learned that the most sustainable kind of success comes from creating value rather than capturing it, from building people up rather than tearing them down, from focusing on what you can control rather than trying to control what other people do. Emma had shown me who she really was, and I had chosen to believe her and act accordingly. The best revenge I had discovered wasn't revenge at all, it was building something so meaningful and successful that the person who had tried to destroy you became completely irrelevant to your future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.